Lyra had never thought her life would be so calm. On Mirinth, calm days were rare. The air always carried the sounds of trade metal carts rolling over stone streets, voices calling prices, machines whirring as merchants prepared their goods. The city was a blend of many worlds, filled with people from dozens of planets. In this busy place, everyone seemed to be in a hurry, but Lyra's small home above the mineral stall was different. It was quiet, peaceful. The reason for that was John. John was a human, tall, lean, with dark hair that often fell into his eyes. He never spoke much, most of the time. He worked behind the stall, polishing the minerals or arranging them on the table in neat rows. His hands were steady, his movements careful. If a customer asked a question, John would answer politely, but never in long sentences. At first, Lyra's friends could not understand why she had chosen him. Why a human? They asked. They are peaceful. Too peaceful. They don't fight for their place. Lyra would smile and say, peace is not weakness. It is strength that does not need to shout. Her parents had been harder to convince. On Mirinth, survival often depended on being quick to defend yourself and your trade. Her father had once run a market stall, and he knew how easily goods could be stolen if you looked away for a moment. A husband who does not speak, he told her, will not speak for you when trouble comes. But Lyra had seen something in John from the first day she met him. It was not in his words. He had spoken very little that day. It was in his eyes. There was a steadiness there, a quiet watchfulness, as if he noticed everything. They met when she had stopped at his stall to buy a crystal for her mother's birthday. The other stalls were loud, with merchants shouting over each other. John's stall had no shouting, only a simple sign with the words, minerals from the inner worlds. The crystals were arranged in careful lines, each one clean and shining. John had looked up from his work, nodded, and waited for her to speak first. Something about that patience had made her curious. In time, curiosity became conversation. Conversation became visits. And visits became marriage. Now, a year later, Lyra felt certain she had made the right choice. Life with John was not filled with loud laughter or grand adventures. Instead, it was filled with small, steady moments, morning tea before the market, open, quiet dinners where they shared stories about the day, walks through the less crowded streets at night. When the lamps glowed softly and the air smelled faintly of the sea, John never raised his voice, never argued with customers. Even when someone tried to lower the price unfairly, he would simply shake his head and move on to the next customer. Lyra sometimes wished he would speak up more, but she could not deny that his calmness made life easier. Still, there were moments that made her wonder. Once, when a cart wheel broke and nearly rolled into a group of children, John had moved faster than she thought possible. He reached the cart before anyone else, stopping it with one strong push. His face showed no surprise at what he had done. He simply set the cart aside and returned to the stall. Another time, during a storm, a piece of metal roofing came loose above their home. Lyra had barely stepped toward the door when John was already on the roof, securing it in the rain, with movements that seemed practiced. He said nothing afterward, only returned inside, dried off, and went back to his work. When she asked him where he had learned to move like that, John had given his usual answer. Here and there, it was the same answer he gave when she asked about his life before coming to Mirinth. On this particular morning, the market was lively. Ships had arrived from the outer colonies, bringing fresh goods. The air was filled with the scent of spice from the cooking stalls and the sound of translators repeating prices in different languages. Lyra and John were arranging a new shipment of minerals, small, smooth stones that shimmered faintly under light. You place them here, John said softly, pointing to the center of the display. Lyra smiled. You could tell me to put them anywhere, and I would. You always know how to make the stall look perfect. John shrugged, almost as if perfection was simply the natural way of doing things around them. Merchants laughed and argued, some exchanging goods, others shouting over the noise. Lyra noticed a group of strangers walking past, their clothes travel-worn. They looked around the market with sharp eyes, speaking in low voices. She thought little of it. Travelers were Common here. By midday, the sun shone brightly on the metal roofs, and the market was at its busiest. Lyra sold several minerals to a trader from the moon colonies, while John spoke briefly with a miner from the inner systems. Everything seemed normal, and yet Lyra felt a strange tension in the air. Perhaps it was just the crowd. As the day went on, she caught herself watching John more closely. He worked as usual, careful, quiet, precise. But every so often, she noticed his eyes shift toward the edges of the market, following movements she had not seen. He seemed to be keeping track of something, though he gave no sign of concern. When the last customer left in the evening, Lyra began to pack the minerals into their storage boxes. "Another good day," she said. "We sold more than last week." John nodded. "Yes." It was not much of an answer, but Lyra had grown used to that. They closed the stall and began the walk home. The streets were still busy, but the shadows had grown longer. The lamps flickered on, one by one. Lyra walked beside John in comfortable silence. Yet in the back of her mind, questions she had pushed aside for months began to return. Who was John before he came to Mirinth? Why did he move like someone trained for more than selling minerals? And why, even in the calmest moments, did his eyes sometimes seem to watch for danger no one else noticed? She glanced at him as they walked. His face was calm as always, but something told her the answers to those questions were closer than she thought. For now, she let them rest. After all, life was peaceful, and peace on Mirinth was rare enough to treasure. But peace, she was about to learn, could be broken in an instant. The next morning, the market felt different. The air was still warm, and the ships still came and went, but there was a restless energy in the streets. People moved faster, speaking in shorter sentences, their eyes glancing over their shoulders. More than usual. Lyra noticed it the moment they opened the stall. "Something is strange today," she said quietly as she arranged a set of smooth green stones in the front row. John's eyes moved over the crowd before he answered. Yes, he didn't explain. He rarely did. But Lyra could see that his gaze kept returning to the northern end of the market, where the entrance gate stood. By mid-morning, the reason became clear. A group of figures entered the market, walking in a tight formation. Their clothes were rough and dust-stained, but their movements were sharp, deliberate. They weren't here to trade. Lyra could tell by the way they looked at the stalls, not with curiosity, but with calculation. The group split apart, moving through the market in pairs, speaking in low tones to certain merchants. The merchants' faces tightened after each conversation. A few quickly packed up their goods and left. Lyra leaned toward John. "Who are they?" He didn't look at her when he spoke. "Trouble." She frowned. "We should close the stall." John shook his head slightly. "Not yet." It wasn't long before one of the strangers, a tall figure with a scar running from his ear to his jaw, approached their stall. His smile was small and unfriendly. "Nice stall," he said, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that comes from knowing no one will challenge you. "These stones must be worth a lot." John didn't answer. Right away, he picked up one of the green stones, turned it in his hand, and set it back down. "They have value," he said evenly. The man's smile widened a little, but his eyes stayed cold. "Then you won't mind paying a small fee, a market protection fee." Lyra's stomach tightened. She had heard of this before traveling. Raiders who called themselves protectors, taking goods and credits from merchants in exchange for not causing trouble. "We don't need protection," Lyra said firmly. The man's gaze shifted to her. "Everyone needs protection, especially small stalls like yours. Things can happen." He reached out and tapped one of the stones with his finger. "It would be a shame if something happened here." John's hand stayed still on the table. "We are fine," he said quietly. "You should move on." The man let out a short laugh. "You're brave for someone who sells rocks." Then his eyes narrowed, and without warning, his hand shot out, gripping Lyra's arm. His fingers were rough and strong. "You should teach your husband to be more respectful," he said. Lyra tried to pull away, but the man's grip tightened. She saw a flicker of movement in the corner of her vision. John was no longer standing behind the stall. He was at her side. His hand closed over the man's wrist, calm steady, but unyielding. "Let go," John said. His voice was still quiet, but there was no softness in it now. The man's smile faltered. For a moment, neither moved. Then, with a small twist of his hand, John made the man release Lyra. The raider stepped back, rubbing his wrist and glaring. "You'll regret that," the man muttered before turning away. He walked off toward the northern gate, disappearing into the crowd. Lyra turned to John. "We should leave. They'll come back." John's eyes scanned the market again. "They already have friends here," he said. The rest of the day passed. Slowly, the crowd seemed thinner, and many stalls closed early. Lyra's mind kept replaying the moment when the man had grabbed her arm, and how quickly John had moved. She wanted to ask about it, but John's face stayed calm and unreadable. As the sun began to lower, most merchants were packing up. Lyra was placing the last of the stones into their storage box when she heard a shout from the far side of the market. It was followed by the crash of something heavy hitting the ground. People began moving quickly, some rushing away, others gathering to see what was happening. Then she saw them, the raiders, now gathered together again, moving through the stalls. This time, they weren't asking for fees. They were taking what they wanted. One merchant tried to stop them, stepping in front of his stall. A raider pushed him aside easily and began sweeping goods into a large sack. Lyra's heart began to race. "They're coming this way," she said. John didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the raiders, measuring their movements. The leader, the same man from earlier, spotted them and began walking toward the stall. He was smiling again, but now there was a sharpness in his eyes. Behind him, 3 others followed. Lyra's first instinct was to step back, to hide behind the stall. But John didn't move. He reached under the table, his hand brushing something she had never noticed before. When it emerged, she froze. It was a sword, not a blaster, not a modern market tool, but an ancient-looking blade with a faint blue light running along its edge. The metal seemed to ripple, almost as if it were alive. John held it loosely in one hand, the tip angled toward the ground. He still hadn't said a word. The raiders slowed as they approached. The leader looked at the sword and laughed. "Old steel. You think you can scare us with that?" John stepped forward, just enough to stand between Lyra and the raiders. His voice was calm, but it carried farther than before. "Leave the market." The laughter from the raiders was quick and loud. One of them raised his weapon, a short energy rifle, and pointed it at John. Lyra's breath caught. She wanted to shout, to tell John to stop, but the words wouldn't come. Something in the air felt heavier now, as if the space around him had changed. The leader smirked. "Last chance, merchant. Hand over your goods." Or, he didn't finish his sentence. John moved. It wasn't a run. Not exactly. It was faster than that. One moment he was in front of the stall. The next he was in front of the leader. The blade flashed once, striking the rifle and sending it spinning into the dirt. The market went silent. Lyra stared. She had never seen anyone move like that. The raiders seemed frozen, unsure if they had just seen a trick or something far more dangerous. John's eyes stayed fixed on the leader. "Leave," he said again, this time with a weight in his voice that made even the crowd take a step back. The raiders hesitated, but the leader's pride was not so easily broken. His hand moved toward the weapon at his belt. John shifted his stance. The faint hum of the sword filled the air, and in that moment, Lyra realized her quiet husband was not who she thought he was. The leader's hand hovered over the weapon at his belt, but his eyes stayed locked on John. The blue light along the sword's edge reflected faintly in those eyes, and for the first time, his smile faltered. The market had gone completely silent. Even the sounds from the far streets seemed to fade. Every merchant, every passerby, every curious child stood still, watching the scene. John didn't raise his voice, walk away. The leader glanced at his men, perhaps hoping they would laugh again or charge forward, but none of them moved. The strange hum of the sword, low but steady, seemed to reach their ears and hold them in place. Finally, the leader forced a smirk back onto his face. "You think we fear old metal," he said. "Let's see if it cuts." He lunged forward, pulling a short energy blade from his belt. The weapon glowed red. its edges humming with unstable light. John's movement was almost too fast to see. The blue sword rose, met the red blade with a ringing sound, and turned it aside with a single motion. Before the raider could swing again, John stepped forward, his shoulder turning just enough to push the man back without striking him. The leader stumbled, caught off balance. His eyes widened. He had expected a clumsy defense from a market seller, not the precision of a trained fighter. Two of the other raiders moved then, rushing at John from either side. Their weapons were modern short rifles designed for close combat. One tried to swing the rifle like a club, the other aimed for John's ribs. John's sword moved in a blur. The flat of the blade knocked the rifle aside, the edge caught the second weapon and sliced through the barrel cleanly. Sparks fell to the ground. Lyra stood frozen behind the stall. She had known John to be quick, but this was different. This was not quick like catching a falling cup or fixing a roof in a storm. This was quick like lightning, controlled like water flowing exactly where it should. One of the raiders cursed under his breath and backed away. The other dropped his broken weapon and raised his hands. The leader growled, stepping forward again. But John's eyes met his and the man stopped. There was no anger in John's gaze, no shouting, no threat, only calm focus. Like someone looking at a problem that needed solving. John turned the blade slightly, the blue light sliding along its length. "You will leave," he said. The leader hesitated. He was proud, but even pride had limits. Round them, the market crowd began to murmur. People were watching closely now, and some merchants who had left earlier were returning. Drawn by the sound of the fight, the leader looked at the crowd, then at John. Finally, with a short, sharp whistle, he signaled to his men. "We're done here," he said, trying to sound in control. One by one, the raiders backed away. Keeping their eyes on John, they moved toward the northern gate, their steps quickening as they passed into the street beyond. When they were gone, the market exhaled as one. Voices returned, but they were quieter, filled with disbelief. Lyra's legs finally seemed to work again. She stepped out from behind the stall and faced John. You had a sword. You fought like—" She stopped herself, unsure what words to use. John looked down at the sword for a moment, then lowered it to his side. It was necessary, he said simply. Lyra shook her head. "That's not an answer. I've never seen anyone move like that. Where did you—" John turned toward her, and for a second, she thought he might actually explain. But instead, he looked at the crowd. Many faces were watching them now, some with awe, others with curiosity. "We should close the stall," he said. "It's late." Lyra wanted to protest, but she could see something in his expression of quiet urgency. She began to pack the minerals into their storage box, still glancing at the sword every few seconds. John sheathed the blade. Lyra hadn't noticed the sheath before, but it was there, hidden beneath the stall's counter. The metal seemed to dim as soon as it slid inside, the hum fading until it was only silence again. They walked home in near silence. The streets were calmer than the market, but Lyra kept looking behind them, half expecting the raiders to reappear. When they reached their small home above the stall, John set the storage box down and began making tea. As if nothing unusual had happened, Lyra sat at the table, her mind still replaying every moment. "You're not just a merchant," she said finally. John poured the tea without looking up. "Not always." She leaned forward. "Then what were you before this?" He set a cup in front of her, then took his own seat. For a moment, he seemed to be deciding whether to speak. "Another time," he said at last. Lyra frowned, but she knew that tone. It was the same tone he used when a question would not be answered. She sipped her tea slowly, though her thoughts were far from calm. Outside, the market lamps flickered in the night breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a ship's engines rumbled as it lifted off. Lyra glanced at John again. His face was calm, but his eyes were still alert, still searching for something unseen. The sword had appeared once today. She had the feeling it would appear again. The next day, the market opened as usual, but there was a different air to it. Some merchants greeted John with quiet nods. their eyes showing both gratitude and curiosity. Others avoided looking at him at all, perhaps unsure if standing near him would invite more trouble. Word of what had happened had spread quickly. Lyra could feel it in the way people glanced at their stall. They were not looking at the minerals, they were looking at John. She wanted to believe the raiders would not return. John had sent them away without a fight that ended in blood. And maybe they would see that as a warning to stay away. But a part of her, deep down, told her that men like that did not forget humiliation. Her worry proved right by midday. The sound reached them, first heavy boots moving in unison. The kind of rhythm made by people who wanted to be heard before they were seen. Heads turned toward the northern gate. Shoppers moved aside, and some merchants quickly covered their goods. The raiders had returned. This time there were more of them, at least a dozen, moving in a tight line. The leader from yesterday walked in front, his scar catching the sunlight. His eyes searched the stalls until they landed on John. He did not smile this time. The crowd began to thin as people stepped back, giving the raiders space. Lyra's pulse quickened. She could feel the tension building in the air. The leader stopped in front of their stall. "You embarrassed me yesterday," he said, his voice louder than it needed to be. "You think you can stand against us alone?" John stood still, his hands resting at his sides. "Leave the market." The leader's jaw tightened. No more warnings. He raised his hand, and two of his men stepped forward. Energy rifles in their grasp. Lyra's instinct was to reach for John's arm, to pull him back, but before she could, he was already moving. His hand reached under the stall. The sword appeared again, its faint blue light flaring to life as it left the sheath. The low hum returned, filling the air like a living thing. The leader's men hesitated. Just for a second, but it was enough. John stepped forward, blade angled low, and in one smooth motion, he knocked the first rifle aside and struck the second with the flat of the sword, sending it spinning into the dust. The movements were so precise, so controlled, that they looked more like a dance than a fight. Gasps rose from the crowd. The raiders behind the leader shifted, their confidence wavering. But the leader barked a short order, and three more stepped forward. These carried long batons crackling with energy. They approached from different angles, trying to box John in. John did not retreat. The first swung his baton at John's head. But the blade was there, intercepting the strike and pushing it away. The second aimed for John's legs, but he sidestepped, the hum of the sword slicing the air. The third tried to rush him from behind. John turned just enough for the flat of the blade to meet the strike, knocking the attacker back without a cut. Every movement was clean, measured. John did not waste energy. His breathing stayed even. The leader watched, his frustration growing. "Stop playing with them," he shouted. The order seemed to push the rest into action. Several raiders charged at once, some with rifles, others with batons or knives. Lyra's heart pounded. She had never seen so many people attack one person at the same time. Yet John moved as if he had done this before, many times before. The sword flashed, blocking strikes, redirecting weapons, never staying still for more than a second. The hum of the blade grew louder, and every time it meant another weapon. The sound rang through the market like a bell. One raider swung a heavy metal rod at John's side. John turned just enough to let it pass, then stepped in close, using his free hand to shove the man back into two others, knocking them off balance. Another tried to fire his rifle from only a few steps away, but the sword's edge met the weapon's barrel, cutting it neatly in half. Sparks fell to the ground. The fight was fast, but it was clear to everyone watching John was in control. The raiders' attacks were forceful, but they lacked the precision and discipline that John carried in every step. Within moments, half of them were on the ground, or retreating toward the edges of the market. The leader was breathing heavily now, his eyes darting between John and the men who still stood. "This isn't over," the leader said through clenched teeth. John took a slow step forward, the sword angled at his side, the blue light still glowing. "It is over for today," he said. "If you return, you will not leave so easily." The leader's eyes narrowed, but something in John's voice, or perhaps in the way the crowd now stood behind him, made him stop. One by one, the raiders began to step back. The leader gave a sharp signal, and they turned, retreating toward the northern gate. When they were gone, the market was silent again. Then the murmurs began, spreading like wind through the crowd. John lowered the sword, sliding it back into its sheath. The light faded, and the hum died away. He turned to Lyra, who was still standing frozen beside the stall. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "No. But you?" She trailed off, unable to find the right words. John only said, "We should close for the day." Round them, merchants began returning to their stalls, speaking in low voices. Some looked at John with respect, others with cautious curiosity. A few nodded at him as they passed. As they walked home, Lyra glanced at the sword hanging at his side. It looked ordinary now, its glow gone. But she knew better. That blade was not just a weapon, it was a part of a past John had not yet shared. And she had the feeling that whatever history he carried, it was not finished with him yet. The morning after the fight, the market felt strangely quiet. It was not the usual kind of quiet that came before the day's business began. This was the kind that followed after something big had happened, when people spoke in low voices and avoided making noise, as if not to disturb the memory of it. When John and Lyra arrived at their stall, some merchants greeted them with polite nods. Others kept their distance, whispering among themselves. The story of the sword and the fight had clearly spread beyond the market. Lyra set the boxes of minerals on the counter, but her eyes kept moving to John. He was arranging the display as if it were any normal day. His calmness was the same as always, yet Lyra felt the weight of unanswered questions pressing against her thoughts. By midday, she could no longer hold them back. "John," she said softly, "we need to talk." He looked up, his hand still resting on a row of green stones. "We are talking," he said. "No," she replied, shaking her head. "Not about minerals or prices. About you, about the sword, about why you fight like no one I've ever seen." For a long moment, John was silent. Then he placed the last stone down, exactly in line with the others, and turned toward her. "Not here." They packed up earlier than usual. The walk home felt longer than it should have, even though the streets were calm. Lyra stayed close to John, her curiosity mixing with a faint unease. Once inside their small home above the stall, John closed the door and went to the corner where the sword now rested in its sheath. He picked it up and held it for a moment, his eyes tracing the length of the blade. "When I came to Marinth," he began, "I wanted to leave my old life behind. I wanted peace. Selling minerals seemed simple, quiet, safe." Lyra leaned forward slightly. "What was your old life?" "I was a guardian," John said. His voice was steady, but there was something heavier in it now. "A protector of trade routes and colonies. My work was to defend people from those who use fear to control them." Lyra frowned. "I've heard of guardians. I thought they were mostly from the old days, before the new alliances." John nodded. "The work is quieter now. Fewer people wear the title openly, but the threats never truly disappear. Some are just less visible." She glanced at the sword. "And the blade, it's not like any weapon I've seen." John's fingers brushed lightly along the metal. "It is a relic from Earth's past, forged long before humans traveled the stars. But it was changed, adapted. It can channel the focus of the one who wields it, the more disciplined the mind. The sharper its edge becomes." Lyra tilted her head. "That's why it hums, why it glows, yes." John said simply, "It responds to intention, not just movement. In the wrong hands, it would be dangerous, not because of its sharpness, but because of the strength it gives to someone's will." She let his words sink in. "Then why hide it? If you can protect people, why not keep doing it?" John's eyes shifted away, toward the small window overlooking the street. "Because every time I draw it, I invite more trouble. The kind that doesn't just pass through a market, but stays, fights, takes root." Lyra thought of the raiders, of the way they had returned in greater numbers. "You mean more will come now?" John nodded once. "They will tell others. Some will see me as a challenge. Others will see the sword as something to take." She crossed her arms, her voice firm. Then we can't just wait. We need to be ready. John's eyes met hers, and for a moment, he seemed to measure her determination. It's not your fight. It became my fight the moment they came for our stall, she said. And if they want this market, they'll come for more than just us. We can't let that happen. For a brief moment, the faintest trace of a smile touched John's face. You remind me of someone I used to know in the Guardians. They never liked standing aside either. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing in quiet, practical ways. John checked the locks on their home, made sure the stall's storage compartments were secure, and began mapping the quickest routes through the market's alleys. Lyra watched closely, memorizing each step dot as evening fell. A knock came at their door. It was Meron, an older merchant whose stall had been to rows away from theirs for years. He stepped inside quickly, glancing over his shoulder as if making sure no one had followed him. I heard a rumor, Meron said, his voice low. The ones you fought, someone saw them speaking to a crew from the Outer Rim. Not just raiders. Syndicate men. Lyra felt her stomach tighten. She had heard stories about the Syndicate, a network that controlled smuggling, piracy, and worse. Across several systems, they were not like the scattered raiders from before. They planned. They invested in control. John's expression didn't change, but his voice was firm. How long before they arrive? Meron shook his head. Could be days. Could be less. But if they take interest in Merinth, they won't leave easily after Meron left. Lyra looked at John. You knew something bigger might come. Yes. John said, which is why we start preparing now. That night, they stayed up late, making quiet plans. John showed Lyra how to spot unusual movement in a crowd, how to tell when someone was watching her from a distance, and how to slip away. Through the narrow back passages of the market, he spoke little about his past, but enough for her to understand that he had faced worse than raiders before. Each skill he taught her came not from theory, but from experience. When they finally rested, the sword lay beside them, its sheath resting against the wall. The faint hum was gone, but Lyra could almost feel its presence in the room. She realized something then. The sword was not just a weapon, it was a message. A silent warning to those who thought humans were easy to overlook. And soon, she suspected, that message would have to be delivered again louder than before. The next morning, the market did not feel like the same place it had been a week ago. People still came to buy and sell, but their eyes moved quickly, scanning the streets. Conversations were short, and laughter was rare. John and Lyra walked through the market slowly, carrying only what they needed. John wanted to observe before setting up their stall. He noticed strangers moving among the regular crabmen and women, who did not seem interested in buying anything. They stood at corners, leaned against walls, and watched. They're here, John said quietly. Lyra followed his gaze and saw one of the strangers adjusting a small device on his wrist. She did not know its purpose, but she could feel the tension rising in her chest. They reached their stall, but John did not begin arranging the minerals. Instead, he kept looking at the flow of people, tracking movements. The Syndicate is not like the raiders, he told her. They do not rush in. They watch. They study. They find weak points. Then we do not give them any, Lyra replied. Firmly. By midday, Meron came to them again, pretending to browse their stones while speaking under his breath. 3 ships docked last night. One of them is a Syndicate carrier. Their leader is called Varen. He has been here before, but never stayed long. This time, I think it will be different. John nodded slightly. Tell the others to prepare. Quietly, no panic, but be ready to close the market fast if needed. Meron left without looking back. Blending into the crowd. Lyra looked at John. How do we prepare against someone like Varen? John's eyes narrowed. We make it costly for him to stay. That evening, after closing the stall early, John and Lyra visited a few trusted merchants and craftsmen. They spoke in private rooms, away from open windows. John explained what he had seen and what was coming. Some were afraid, others angry. One merchant, a tall woman named Serene, crossed her arms. We have guards, she said. Why not let them handle this? John shook his head. The guards here are not trained to fight syndicate enforcers. The syndicate will not attack openly. They will bribe, threaten, and control from the inside. If the guards cannot resist their offers, they will become part of the problem. So what do we do? Serene asked. We make the market difficult to control, John said. If we work together, they cannot quietly take over without resistance in every corner. Over the next 2 days, quiet preparations began. Merchants formed a network of signal small cloth markers placed on stalls to warn of danger. Specific patterns of baskets or crates to signal safe routes, and simple hand gestures that could be passed quickly through the crowd. John trained a small group to move supplies quickly in case the syndicate tried to block exits. Lyra learned these routes too, and she began showing other stall keepers how to hide their most valuable goods without making it obvious. At night, John practiced with his sword in the empty square behind their home. The blade's faint hum echoed softly through the still air. Lyra sometimes watched from the doorway. His movements were precise and calm, but she could sense the readiness in every step. On the 3rd morning, the syndicate made its presence clear. A group of 6 men entered the market, wearing dark coats marked with a small silver emblem near the collar. They did not speak loudly, but wherever they went, merchants looked away. One of them stopped at a stall, picked up a carved wooden box, and placed it back without paying. The stall owner said nothing. John watched them from a distance. They were testing boundaries. By afternoon, the group reached John in Lyra's stall. The man in front, tall and broad-shouldered, looked over the display with slow interest. His eyes were cold. You sell minerals, he said. Yes, John replied evenly. Good stones. The man continued. You will set aside the best for US from now on. Payment will be fair. He gave a thin smile that did not reach his eyes. John met his gaze without blinking. We sell to customers who come to us. We do not take special orders for anyone. The smile faded. I am not asking. John's hand rested lightly on the counter. Then we have nothing to discuss. The man's jaw tightened, but he turned away without another word. His companions followed. When they were gone, Lyra let out the breath she had been holding. That was dangerous, she whispered. It was necessary, John said. If we give them anything, they will take everything. That evening, word spread quickly. The syndicate men had visited several stalls, and some merchants had already agreed to their terms. Fear was growing. John gathered the small group of trusted merchants again. They will keep coming. We cannot match their ships or their numbers, but we can make their hold on this place unstable. If they cannot control the market easily, they will look elsewhere. How? Someone asked. By showing them they cannot move unseen, John explained. Every time they appear, we make sure the whole market knows. Every time they try to take goods without paying, we record it and share it. The syndicate thrives in silence. We take that away. The group agreed. For the next few days, the plan began to work. Whenever syndicate men entered the market, subtle signals spread ahead of them. Merchants prepared, customers moved aside, and several pairs of eyes followed every step they took. They could no longer move quietly, but John knew this was only the beginning. Syndicate leaders were patient, but not endlessly so. If they decided the quiet approach was failing, they might act more openly, and that would be far more dangerous. Late one night, as John sat by the small table, checking a hand-drawn map of the market's routes, Lyra placed a cup of tea beside him. They are not leaving yet, are they? She asked. No, John said. And when they decide to act, it will happen fast. Then we will be ready, she said firmly. John looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. She was no longer just the curious market vendor he had married. She was becoming someone who could stand beside him when the shadows grew darker. Outside, the night air carried the faint hum of ship engines from the docks. Somewhere in that darkness, Varen and his men were planning their next move. John quietly rested his hand on the sword beside him. The time for patience was running out. The morning sky was pale gray when Lyra opened the shop shutters. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the city itself was holding its breath. A thin mist clung to the market streets. Wrapping the stalls in a soft haze, John stepped outside with her, scanning the empty lanes. Usually, at this hour, merchants were already setting up. But today, fewer stalls were open, and the ones that were had owners who worked in silence, avoiding each other's eyes. "They know something is coming," John murmured. Lyra glanced at him. "From the way you say it, you do too." John didn't answer directly. Instead, his gaze moved toward the main road leading into the market. In the distance, he saw shapes emerging through the mist, slow, steady, and purposeful. As the figures drew closer, details became clear. These were not the usual syndicate men who had been testing the market for the past few days. This group walked with sharp precision, their dark coats marked with silver threads in the seams. Their boots struck the ground in perfect rhythm. At the front walked a man who moved like someone used to being obeyed. "Varen," John said. Quietly, Lyra followed his gaze. Varen was tall and lean, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to measure everything they passed. His hair was dark, streaked with silver at the temples, and his long coat was perfectly cut. He did not speak to the men behind him. He didn't need to. When they reached the heart of the market, Varen stopped. He looked slowly around, taking in every stall, every merchant, every customer who dared to remain. The silence spread like ripples through water. Finally, his eyes landed on John and Lyra's stall. He walked toward them. Each step was unhurried, but there was no mistaking his intent. The crowd subtly shifted, creating a clear path. When he reached the stall, he stopped just far enough for his voice to carry without raising it. "You are the one who refuses my terms." John met his gaze calmly. "I am the one who sells to customers who come in peace." Varen's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Peace is a fragile thing, merchant. Sometimes it needs the right guardians, and sometimes," John replied, "it only needs people willing to stand for it." For a moment, they simply studied each other. Varen's eyes narrowed, and he tilted his head slightly. "You are not from here, I can tell. People from here learn quickly when to step aside." "I have seen enough places," John said evenly, "to know that stepping aside is how you lose them." Varen chuckled softly. "You speak like a soldier. But soldiers need armies. Do you have one?" John did not answer. The stillness between them deepened. Behind Varen, one of his men shifted, as if expecting an order. But Varen held up a hand, stopping him. His eyes never left John's. "I admire courage." Varen said, "It makes things interesting, but it can also be expensive." Without another word, Varen turned and began walking through the market again. His men followed, moving in pairs, stopping at stalls to speak to merchants. Some merchants nodded quickly, agreeing to whatever was being said. Others hesitated, glancing nervously in John's direction. John kept his eyes on Varen's movements. He could tell that this was not a random walk. Varen was mapping the market in his mind, marking who could be swayed and who could be pressured. By midday, Varen was gone, but his presence lingered. People spoke quietly about him, their voices low, as if he might still be listening. That evening, Miron came to John's door. "You saw him," Miron said without preamble. "I saw enough," John replied. "He's already made offers to the dock workers. If he controls the docks, it won't matter how many merchants refuse him. He can block supplies, raise fees, and starve the market until people give in." John nodded. "Then we have to make sure the docks stay free." "How?" Miron asked. "We can't outfight him. His men are trained, and more will come if he calls." "We don't fight him head-on," John said. "We make it costly for him to stay. If he cannot profit here, he will move to an easier place." Over the next 2 days, John and Lyra focused on strengthening the network they had started. Merchants shared more signals. Dock workers were quietly encouraged to refuse bribes, and trusted runners carried messages between the market and the docks. But Varen adapted quickly. On the 3rd day, syndicate guards appeared at the docks in pairs, helping with unloading. They kept careful watch, and any worker who refused their orders found themselves replaced by someone new. That night, John walked along the edge of the docks alone. The moonlight shone faintly on the water, and the air was thick with the smell of salt and oil. from the shadows. He saw syndicate men moving crates under the cover of darkness, marking them with a silver emblem before loading them onto carts. They were not just here to control trade, they were smuggling something. John returned home and explained what he had seen to Lyra. She listened intently, her brow furrowed. If we can prove this, the city council will have to act. Maybe, John said. But Varen will not give us that chance easily. If he suspects we know, he will move faster. The next morning, Varen returned to the market. This time, he came directly to John's stall. His men spread out, blocking nearby paths. You watch too much, Varen said quietly. It is not healthy. I prefer to understand the people who want to change my home, John replied. Your home? Varen asked, his tone almost amused. A home is where you are safe, and right now, this place is not safe for you. John's hand rested lightly on the counter. Then perhaps it is not safe for anyone. For the first time, Varen's expression hardened, the polite tone in his voice thinned. You think you can stop me? I think you can be stopped, John said. A small silence hung in the air. Then Varen smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. We will see. He turned sharply, signaling his men to follow. As they left, Lyra stepped up beside John. He's testing you, she said. John nodded. And the next test will be harder. The day continued in uneasy quiet, but John could feel that the tension was building, like the slow pull of a bowstring. Soon, something would break. That night, as the city slept, John sat by the table, his sword lying beside him. He was no longer wondering if Varen would act. He was only wondering when. And in the distance, on the dark waters beyond the docks, another syndicate ship's lights appeared drifting closer.